to on the parent panel this morning was the fact that there are extensive musculoskeletal features of Prader-Willi syndrome. So we've heard a little bit about the low lean muscle mass, muscle weakness and poor coordination, and all of these things make exercise harder. When exercise is hard, that means people are more likely to be sedentary, and when people are sedentary, then you kind of set up a cycle of deterioration that leads to weight gain. It can lead to social isolation, reduced quality of life, and ultimately early death. Now, the mainstay of management for Prader-Willi is aerobic exercise and strictly controlling diet. And the focus really is on weight and also managing energy balance. But again, as we heard, I was struck by Amanda, who was talking about her daughter Liv, who was talking about dyspraxia. And the thing about aerobic exercise is that it's actually quite tricky when you've got an intellectual disability and your motor skills aren't particularly good, because it requires prolonged concentration and high levels of coordination. The other thing is that it has no effect on muscle mass or on muscle strength. So the thing is that we know strength training can actually make a difference to these things, but that's not routinely prescribed for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Now, the evidence base in this area is small, but it is growing. So there are a number of trials now. But one of the key things about these trials is that they often use research designs that are not the highest quality trials. So I will talk, has been one randomized controlled trial, and I'll talk about that one in a little bit more detail in a minute. But the other thing about these studies is that they often have their exercise programs happening at home or in a clinical setting, supervised by family members or health professionals. And that's not actually the way that most people exercise, or indeed most young people with disability don't want to exercise in that way. They want to exercise in the community, and they want to exercise with peers rather than parents. Another sort of feature of these studies that you find is that they don't tend to push people very hard. They tend to be low intensity, and they tend to be non-progressive. And so that's a key thing. If you want to get changes in strength, you actually need to progress the intensity of the exercise, and indeed for aerobic exercise too. However, across the board, what we find from the literature is that we can get a positive change in physical function when you participate in exercise, or when people with Prader-Willi participate in exercise. Now, the one randomized controlled trial in the area was a phase 1 trial that was conducted by our team at La Trobe. It was a phase 1, so really we were looking at proof of concept. We were trying to get an example or an estimate of the effect size. And what we found when we recruited the 16 participants is that our estimates were that there was quite a large effect size. And so what we did is that we then used these pilot data to then seek funding for a phase 2 study. And so that study has been funded by MRFF, and it's a multi-site randomized controlled trial happening in Australia. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you the results of the study today because we are still in data collection, but what I wanted to tell you was what the trial's about and who we've recruited and roughly what's going to happen from here on in. But the aim of our study is to investigate the efficacy of strength training to improve muscle strength for people with Prader-Willi, and we've published our trial protocol in BMJ Open. It's a pretty straightforward randomized controlled trial design, so we recruit people and we test them at baseline. They then get allocated at random to either the experimental or the control group. They then participate in a 6-month intervention, an exercise intervention that takes place in a community venue. They then are retested immediately after the intervention, and then 6 months later. So we have recruited people with Prader-Willi who are aged 13 to 60 years, who are able to follow simple verbal instructions in English. We've excluded people when they've been doing strength training for the previous 3 months, because we want to know that any changes that we find are due to the intervention and not due to what they were already doing. And we've tried to be inclusive. So pretty much there were sort of a number of small instances where somebody would be excluded, such as if they had very severe arthritis, or if there was severe psychosis, or there was something that would just mean they would not be able to exercise at a community venue. Now, what is strength training? So it's where you lift weights, or weight training, but you lift them a small number of times until your muscles get tired. So what we're looking for is muscle fatigue. As people get stronger and as they can lift, as they get better at doing the exercises, we then need to increase the weight that they lift, and this is known as progressive overload. Strength training is also a good choice for people with Prader-Willi. The skills are quite easy to learn. It's quite repetitive. It's safe. We know we've got a lot of data from other disability populations that show that it's a safe intervention. And it's also quite inclusive, because the principles are applied to everybody in the same way. So the intensity of the strengthening is done sort of at an individualized level. So you apply strength training in the same way for any individual. It doesn't matter if you've got Prader-Willi or if you're an elite athlete. The principles are the same. So as I mentioned, the intervention is happening, or has happened, at local community gyms, so places local to the participant, and they get one-to-one support from a personal trainer or another exercise professional. Participants in the trial train twice a week for 24 weeks, so 48 sessions in total, and they get allocated to one of 2 exercise programs. So when people were recruited into the study, they got told that there were 2 exercise programs. They would be allocated to one of those exercise programs. Those exercise programs happen in the same venue. They have the same amount of supervision. You do the training the same number of times per week with the same exercises and the same number of reps. Difference between the 2 programs is the progressive overload. So one group are training at high intensity and the other group are just training at low intensity. There are 6 exercises, so 3 for the arms and 3 for the legs. And the intensity, as I say, is the same. So for each exercise, you do 12 repetitions of that exercise, and you do that 3 times. Those 12 repetitions are known as a set, and you do 3 sets. For people in the progressive resistance group, once they can do 3 sets of 10 repetitions, you increase the weight that they are lifting. And we've used pin-loaded machines for all of the training, because that is safer when you have novice trainers. It's easier to control the weight. Now, we looked at a whole range of outcome measures. Our primary outcome measure is muscle strength. But we have looked at muscle mass using DEXA scans. There's some physical function measures, and there are a whole range of others. It's all in the trial protocol if you want to go into a bit more detail on that. And we had 3 assessment sites in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. And we were all ready to start in March 2020. So you can guess what happened next. So our recruitment was delayed by up to 12 months. There were multiple things happened in terms of using assessment sites. So our Brisbane assessment site, for example, was a clinical site. So the area that we were using for assessments was repurposed for the purposes of clinical use. Participants in the study were less willing, and quite understandably less willing, to travel to sites for assessment, so we ended up organising quite a lot of local assessment. So we were very delighted that we had set up all of our outcome measures, that they were quite standard measures that could actually be taken, could be done locally. Gyms, of course, were one of the first places to close during lockdowns and one of the last places to open. So there were quite a lot of disruptions due to gym closures. And there were also some missed assessments, and some of that were due to lockdowns, but some of that was also due to, once we were coming out of lockdowns, because people with Prader-Willi were more vulnerable to COVID-19, people were less willing to attend assessments just in some of those immediate times. But like everybody else, we modified what we were doing to try and make it work. So we, created our resources to make sure that we could train our assessors and also our assessors and the personal trainers who were working with the participants at the gyms. All that training was done online. We could complete our assessments locally, and we worked with the gyms and participants to actually extend gym memberships and the like where necessary. The one thing we kept constant was the time point of the 6-month assessment. So regardless of how many sessions somebody had completed for the intervention, we continued to keep the 6-month assessment when it was due. And we recruited 58 people into the trial from across Australia. We met our recruitment target and we were really delighted. We recruited people from all states and territories with one exception. The average age of our participants is 24 years, and this is pretty representative of what previous trials have found. The average age of recruitment into those trials was somewhere between 24 and 29 years. We had roughly equal number of men and women. Most of our participants were living with family, but there was about a third of them living in supported living. There was a reasonable representation about what we would expect in terms of the types of Prader-Willi, and 24 of our participants were receiving growth hormone. So we are in the final, all our recruitment was complete by September last year, and the intervention phase has also been completed. It was completed in March this year. We had 13 of our participants who were disrupted due to lockdowns, and our attendance rate at the sessions was 66%, which for a 6-month exercise intervention is pretty good. Our follow-up phase, so that those very final 12-month assessments will be completed in the next couple of months. And after that, we will embark on data analysis, which is one of the exciting parts of any project. But another really important part of this project was the knowledge translation, which we had planned. And so we have developed resources which we intend to make freely available. So the training manual, for example, that we use to train the personal trainers, that will be made available. We've developed some case studies to share best practice, and these really are narratives. These are, designed to kind of tell the stories of some of our participants, so that other people and their families can understand the thinking behind why some participants and their families chose to participate. We're going to look at the articulation with the NDIS, so we've done some work on that. We will undertake some training workshops for families and professionals. We'll do our usual dissemination, as most of researchers will do, in terms of publications and presentations. Our data will be made open access, freely available for everybody, and we do hope that the data will be very useful for things like developing clinical guidelines for people with Prader-Willi. A project like this, it takes a village to do, and I just want to call out a few really key people. One is Alicia Southby, who's the trial coordinator, who's done an amazing job to actually keep this show on the road during a pandemic. I'd also like to call out our consumer advisors. Dr. Susan Blair is in the room. But just to really, make a point that Kathy Vaughan made earlier on, in that our consumer advisors were essential to this project actually working. They provided very sage advice and support when we needed it, but they also challenged us. They asked us questions that were hard questions and that we had to really reflect on to make work. And the final thing I wanted to say was, which was mentioned earlier on, was the importance of the clinical sites. So really we were successful in recruiting because of our clinical sites, both in Queensland and in New South Wales, which was quite different to what we had anticipated. And so I just again want to acknowledge and say a huge thank you to all of the key people, and Tanya and Georgina are in the room, so thank you for all your hard work from the New South Wales crew.